What's up, guys? Seth here to help you level up your fandom. This week I don't have another campaign diary because we didn't play last week, but I wanted to go over a little bit of some of the prep that I went through to get ready for this coming session. So stick around and you'll see what I did. Hey guys, thanks for sticking around. First things first, I want to give a huge shout out to my friend Jeffrey Moss, who is a friend of mine who didn't get a chance to play in this campaign, but I've been talking with him a lot about the campaign itself, and he gave me a gift. See if you can guess what this is. Yeah, it's a hand-drawn map of Raxia, which is the Calabrus change that I made. He dipped it in coffee, he burned a bunch of it. You can see like these edges up here. These edges are all burned. He did 100% by hand. It's super awesome. So, an amazing gift, really. A large portion of what I wanted to talk about in this video is maps and when to show them to your players, how much of a map they should know, and just making that decision, because that's something that I always questioned and struggled with, and this coming session is going to hit that a lot. We're going to see a lot of maps. We're going to introduce the dungeon map, we're going to introduce the world map, and I wanted to explore how much of a map my players would know. So the first issue and question that I run into is, you've come up with a world map, right? Do you show it to your players? Do they know anything about this? I decided to kind of go off some of their backstory. So, John grew up in the forest with one person as a loner, kind of this hermit person. So I figured that he wouldn't have a large knowledge of the world around him. Same thing goes for Amifree, which is the wizard half-elf. She grew up kind of on the edge of Haldrum, not really a lot of world view. But the half-drow, Albin, he is in the military. He is tasked specifically with traveling the world. So I kind of gauged their knowledge of the wider world based on their backstory. And I wasn't sure how to introduce the world map to all three of these players. So with the introduction of this hand-drawn map, we scanned this in, and what I'm going to do is essentially make several copies of this, some blown into areas that the characters lived in, and some just as a world map, and I'm going to burn or tear or in some way obscure the rest of this map so that the knowledge the players have from their backstories, the hermit would only know his surrounding area, maybe a town or maybe some knowledge of the kingdoms around him, like not a lot. I'm going to obscure the rest of the world so that not only does he only kind of know what he's experienced, but also the map won't reflect that. But at the same time, he'll still have a map to reference and kind of maybe fill in some as he goes along. So it kind of gives you the opportunity to black out parts of the map with a more plausible reason behind it, instead of just like, oh, you wouldn't know this, here you go, here's a map. It gives you kind of a more solid reason behind why they don't have a complete map. So once I answered some questions I had about the world map and when to present it to my players, I could move on to the adventure at hand. And we left off with Gorpus the Constructed showing up in the tavern. I've got a few things planned out. I'm not going to spoil a whole lot. Some minor spoilers here, so don't watch if you want to wait for the next campaign diary. I had decided that Gorpus the Constructed would for sure cast sleep on the adventurers and kidnap the rest of the people in the tavern, including the bartender, who the party has become somewhat friends with at this point. I'm taking Matt Colville's kind of approach to introducing a bad guy like he did with Calarel of Vile. If you haven't seen that video, check out the card and go watch it. It's an amazing introduction. But I'm kind of stealing parts of that, where Gorpus the Constructed feels that these people in this tavern are completely beneath him, barely worth noticing at all. So if the party tries to attack him or anything like that, he'll just brush them away and move on with his life. with that in mind, I think it's a great way to introduce a bad guy that the players can interact with but can't really do anything about right now, and I love that. I want to do something similar here, where no matter what the players try to do, they can't really change Gorpus the Constructed's plans. He's going to cast sleep on them, and he's going to kidnap the people in the tavern. I've got several reasons why he's going to kidnap them and what he's doing there, but you're gonna have to wait for the next campaign diary for that. So what I decided was, since the players didn't have the opportunity to really change any of that, I think they were probably kind of take that bait in that they're gonna want to go and save these people from the tavern. I think. To that end, I decided to hop on DysonLogos Patreon, which you guys should definitely support. Link in the doobly-doo down below. He does amazing dungeons and city maps and stuff like that, and I love everything that he's put out, really. So hopped on his Patreon, grabbed this map, and I decided that this would be the dungeon that the goblins are taking the people of the tavern to. But I'm not entirely sure that my players will want to just beeline it for this dungeon. So what I decided to do was flesh out several of the cities or towns within a couple of days walking distance from where they are now. That way, if they decide not to go straight for the dungeon, they can head to pretty much any town around where they are, and I will have at least something fleshed out for that. I decided that within a couple of days walk from where they are would be enough time to play through the session, and say they're going to head to another town that I had very lightly prepared. They can get to that town, do some adventuring along the way or what have you, and by the time they get to that town, we will need to transition to the next session, which will give me another week or so to prep that town or prep whatever's happening there. So they have the opportunity to go wherever they want in such a way that I will still have time to prep wherever they go. So I can hear you guys now. Well, let's talk about the towns that you've prepped. Okay, here's a map. They're currently up here in Corum. Okay, now I have decided that to prep just a few of these towns. I came up with a solid location for the dungeon because I thought that would feel more real than just placing the dungeon wherever it happens to be. So I came up with the location on the backside of Corum here. I just marked it on the map, and I just made the decision that's where the dungeon is, so that all these town folk kind of around all these towns around Corum can know a few things or see goblins running in that direction. It solidifies a more real dungeon. And because I decided to put it where it is, I knew that if they were going to head for that dungeon, they had two real options. They could go around Corum or straight up through the mountains. So with that in mind, I decided to flesh out some of these cities, including Castor and Arden, as well as I placed a few villages, a few cities and stuff in and around Corum, just to flesh out the world. Because they're not going to go much further away from that, even if they beeline it in the complete opposite direction. So that being said, let's look at this map. These towns right here. This is Castor, which is on the Calabris map that was added in during the Matt Colville stream. I decided that since it is so close to the border of Corum, that there's another dwarvish city literally right upon it, which I called Durthrum. Okay, so Castor and Durthrum are kind of sister cities. One is in Corum and is a dwarvish nation. The other is Castor. It's in Ardinia. It's a human, mostly, city. So I came up with the idea that these two cities, being so close together, are completely symbiotic. They need one another to survive. And I really like that idea, but I also really like the idea that they're still separate. So I needed to come up with a way to kind of further flesh this out. So I decided that instead of a border or a wall or something, that Castor butted up against Corum in the form of a giant cliff. And then Durthrum is the dwarvish city on top of those cliffs. So you have this kind of mesa plateau that the dwarven city butts right up against the edge, and then it's a huge sheer drop down to Castor. And since looking vertically on a map, it's almost one city, but you have this several 100-foot straight sheer drop from one city to the next. So they're still close enough that it's a half day or a day walk up and down the side of this cliff for trade and to make commerce really easy. So the two cities can still intermingle, but they're still separate. And once I decided they're sister cities almost, a moment of creativity kind of just flowed out, where I decided that they would be symbiotic. They would rely on each other. So I pulled on that thread, and I decided that Corim, the Corim side, Durthrum, the city, would be mining kind of minerals and dirt out of the side of this mountain. No real gemstones are left or anything like that, so they're mining this super enriched dirt that is found in the heart of Corim's mountains. And that dirt is being shipped and sold to Castor, and Castor is using that dirt as a really potent fertilizer to grow crops and feed livestock in such a way that it explodes their growth. They can, instead of one harvest season a year, which is typical, they have 3 now, because this dirt is so rich and plentiful and bountiful. And because of that abundance of food and stuff, they can afford to feed Durthrum. So Durthrum provides the soil, Castor provides the food. So they're kind of interconnected with this. And because of that, I thought that the cities themselves wouldn't really harbor any resentment towards each other on the whole. But there is factions and groups that resent being so tied to the other city. And that creates this really interesting conflict where you kind of have this underbelly of the city that wants to separate itself from the other city, but the governing body and the people at large don't agree with that. So there's this interesting conflict going on in the city, and that I think is enough of an idea where if the players make their way to this dual city kind of place, that if they want to spend time there and explore this conflict, or it gives me as a DM a foothold or kind of a hook to start some other conflict if the players end up staying in this city or want to kind of explore the politics or whatever in this city. It gives me another hook. So let's go back to maps. I found the dungeon map, and I decided to write an accompanying page of stuff that's going on there, secrets or where the goblins are or what's happening in this dungeon, just to kind of really flesh that out. And I decided that my players wouldn't know what's in this dungeon. They wouldn't have any kind of inkling of the map of this dungeon. So what I'm going to do is, I've got this kind of master copy here with all my notes and stuff. I'm going to have that behind the DM screen on my own, and I'm just going to put a blank piece of graph paper in the center of this table for my players so that they can write and keep track of this dungeon as they explore it. And I'm just going to tell them what's happening. Tell them that you feel the wall and it gives way to a corner, or it's lighted enough that you can see this and this and this, and just verbally explain that to them so that they get kind of the same experience as exploring the dungeon themselves. And I really like that. I think that having a map is super important, but showing the players the map isn't always the best way to go. So because of that, I'm totally okay with them making their own map or not having a map at all, which my players don't necessarily like. I asked my players specifically, do you guys want to play, heavy miniatures? Do you want to play with like some really heavy tactical kind of combat, fully on the grid? Like, I asked them what their preferred playstyle is, because I don't really know what my preferred playstyle is. And they said that they really liked the idea of miniatures. They really liked that tactical combat experience, but I'm not entirely sure how to meld the two. So what I think I'm going to do, and I will let you know in the campaign diary how well this worked, is have my master copy of the map, have them make their own copies of the map in the center of the table as they explore, and I will just introduce miniatures if and when they become relevant. So I think I'm going to kind of try and combine the two. Somewhat tactical, somewhat theater of the mind style combat. Because I think that's what my players really want, even though neither one of us can fully explain that. Yep, this is her video now. And that's pretty much everything I've decided on maps so far. Give me a thumbs down if you didn't really like this video. Give me a thumbs up if you really like this cat. Make sure to subscribe if you want to see the rest of my campaign diaries. And if you want to see the rest of these little kind of DM tip video things I'm doing in the meantime. And I hope all of your rolls are 20s.